Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. It's so great to be here. As I record this, I'm looking out the window and it is glorious. We are finally in the throngs of spring. I'm very excited to be able to leave the house without wearing 3,000 layers when I go birdwatching. Whilst it may not be spring where you are, I hope that the turn of the seasons is bringing you a chance to reflect on new beginnings. And with the incredible vaccine program that's rolling out around the globe, I hope things will soon return to normal for us all. I just want to say at the top that I now do open calls via my Twitter. So if you know somebody that might be suitable for this podcast, keep an eye on that page, Specimens Pod. And I hope that you will help me to reach people all across the globe who are representing conservation and preservation services. And with all that being said, it's time to introduce today's guest. Welcome back to Specimens Pod. Today's guest is somebody that you may already know or at least recognise her name. Elle Graslie is a science communicator, artist, video host and producer, and she's a museum professional with over 10 years of experience in her field. Through Emily's remarkable work, she has been able to communicate science and make it exciting, interesting and accessible to millions of people around the world. I was therefore completely honoured to be able to sit down with Emily and have been given so much of her time so generously to have this conversation. We did cover a lot of ground. We go to the highs of that responsibility and her amazing experience, but we also cover some of the lows. And I want to thank Emily in advance for her vulnerability, and I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. Emily, I'm so delighted to host you on my podcast. How are you and where are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I am in the Chicagoland area. I actually live south of the city, but in the region.
Tell me, were you born and bred in that region, or did you grow up somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm originally from Rapid City, South Dakota, which is on the western side of the state, and lived there for 17 years, and then went and got my undergraduate degree in fine art from the University of Montana in Missoula. So I'm a Chicago area transplant. I've been here, gosh, I guess almost 8 years. So it's flown by.
Well, we'll go to where you went with your fine art shortly, but I would love, and it's the thing I ask all of my guests at the beginning, I'd love if you could take me right back, if that's okay, and tell me a little bit about young Emily and about where you grew up and how, if at all, this environment impacted your love of the natural world.
Oh, 100%. I wouldn't be who I am today without, having the privilege that I did to live where I did and to have parents who fostered a love for the natural world. So, yeah, South Dakota, not a lot of people know other people from South Dakota. And part of it is it's not a populous state at all. There's still fewer than 1 million people who live in this area. And I lived in the second largest city in South Dakota, Rapid City, which is near the Black Hills, and sort of between the Black Hills and the western part of the state, and then the Badlands area. So Rapid City, South Dakota, where I grew up, is the second largest city in the entire state of South Dakota, but still only has 60,000 people. So I just share that to give you an idea of like how rural the area is. Um, I didn't realize how unfettered my access to nature was until I moved to a dense urban area, but it was just a part of my life growing up. We went hiking every weekend. Our house growing up opened up to a part of a forested area that I remember, we had bobcats and deer and turkeys and all sorts of animals in our backyard. And in a short drive, you could be in the middle of the Black Hills National Forest, or you could be out in Badlands in, these amazing places with just, you could see for miles and miles in every direction. So nature was all around me in a very tangible way that was concrete and easy to access. And that was absolutely a formative part of who I am today.
That sounds absolutely beautiful. So tell me a little bit about how this inspiration presented in your subject study, your art practice. Talk to me about life at school, or should I say life before science?
Yeah. I was a poor science student. I loved art though. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I quote grew up. But I've loved art from an early age. I think middle school is really when it started to take hold. And Then certainly by high school, I was pouring most of my time and energy into the arts, whether performing arts and music and theater, or fine arts, as I was doing it with painting. And my subject matter was really inspired and influenced from the places that I lived and the areas where I spent a lot of time. So my father is a farmer and rancher, and we lived in the city, but still maintained some land about 2 hours from where I grew up. And it was in these places where you can see these massive thunder cell clouds forming over the prairie that are, miles and miles away from where you're standing, but you can watch them form and come closer and closer to you. It's this overwhelming sense of dread that you have no control and nowhere to hide. And that is the reality of people who live on the plains, whether they were indigenous people or homesteaders and settlers. That sense of being completely subjected to the natural world and at the whims of its, unrelenting and uh, impervious, I don't know, sort of acknowledgement for your own existence as a human there. That to me, that was the dynamic that I really wanted to capture in my artwork. So when I started to think about colleges, I wanted to live somewhere that could foster this love of creating a relationship between the natural world and people. And that's what I was pursuing at the University of Montana. I was making very large landscape paintings of big, big storms.
I was going to say, how on earth do you encapsulate something that sounds so
Yeah.
enormous into something tangible? But I'd love to see those. That sounds gorgeous. So you did major in art at the University of Montana. So you had all of this practice. Did you think that you were going to pursue a career, a professional career as an artist?
Yeah, I did, but not even like I didn't even give myself the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't like, I'm gonna be a professional artist. I just was like, I'm probably never gonna make a living at this.
Right.
I'll never forget one class my senior year of college. We were taking I can't remember what it was called, but it was like art and professionalism, or how to become a professional artist, something like that, something about the business of being an artist. And my professor shared some statistic with us that out of all of the graduates in our class, maybe 10% of them would go on to become full-time professional artists. And he's saying this to a group of senior BFA students who are a semester away from graduating, being told that 90% of us will never make it as an artist. So I didn't even let myself dream that it would be a possibility. And I have when I was working, I started working when I was 14 in actually a chocolate factory. And then that's a different story. But I started, baking and being a barista. And so I always just assumed I would work in a coffee shop or a bakery for my work during the day. And then I would pursue art on the side. That was kind of like my whole idea of imagining what my future would look like.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if you can relate. So, having studied art myself and having a very similar feeling about art going forward, ever since I actually committed to art and became what you would consider, quote unquote, a professional artist, I've always been challenged on the usefulness of art and of being an artist.
Hmm.
And even now, I'm regularly justifying taxidermy as having value in the art sphere, and why it has value and is important in science. Why do you think, if you have an opinion on this, that we're taught that it is art versus science rather than them being connected? And how do you feel that they're connected?
Well, people like binaries because they offer two polar opposite sides of a spectrum. And I think it's a lot easier for people when presented with a topic or a discipline to try and figure out
Mm.
where they fit on that spectrum. And historically, science has been touted as something that is logical and unfeeling and uncreative and analytical, unimaginative. And that falls on one side of the spectrum of people who identify with procedures and it's something that is very rigid, that has defined expectations. And I'm saying all of this, I'll preface it by saying this was my own misconception and my own internalized bias about what I thought science was. So on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have art and creativity and self-expression and experimentation and all of these other things, that just seemed like, how could you reconcile the two if they're so disparate? And you see this perpetuated all the time when we say artists are right brain thinkers, scientists are left brain thinkers. Um, I think those sort of ideas they plant a notion in our minds that you have to pick one side of the spectrum or the other, not that you can fall anywhere on it or you can travel along the spectrum. And two, I think art also suffers from the lack of, people just think it has no utility. Like it's not critical, right? It's not that it doesn't play any important role in our day-to-day lives like science can. People say science leads to medicine and innovation and drives industry and development and, all of these things that suggest growth and
Mm.
expansion and progress. Whereas art just seems like oftentimes is something that happens as a product of those other things, that it's somehow reactionary in nature only, not that it is in itself an artist, themselves contributing to the same very things of innovation and growth and progress. And they do so by means of like just creating channels of communication that otherwise don't exist. Fundamentally, that's what art is just a different means of communication. So I think, I mean, it's my life's work to try and reconcile the two.
Yes, and it's very interesting. I was actually thinking the other day that the phrase scientific illustration feels as though it's a little bit of an oxymoron because you've got some two things that historically, as we're discussing, haven't usually been categorized as being one and the same. And yeah, it's amazing when you think about how informative and educational scientific illustration is about communicating with us about the natural world. And it's just a very interesting one to think about that one. Can you talk to me, Emily, about the moment where your artistic practice shifted from what you were doing in the studio, and the landscape work that you have mentioned into more natural science and having a more scientific objective?
Yeah, it was something that I didn't realize was happening until it had happened, in a way. So I'd focused a lot on landscape painting and then was starting to think, well, what are the individual elements that make up a landscape? Because from an artist's perspective, if you imagine yourself standing out in a field like I was, and you look out around you, as an artist who's not, my goal wasn't to make, realistic art. I wasn't into realism. I was more into, expressionism. uh, I'm not so concerned about getting all of the plants and the grasses right. I'm not really concerned about the perfect, one to one translation of what I'm seeing in front of me and what I put on the canvas. It's, a lot more fluid.
Mm.
But then I realized, well, why not figure out what the grasses are? Why not figure out what this insect is that I hear around me? I mean, don't all of those things also contribute to what experiencing a landscape is? So I wanted to try and insert more of that into my landscape art, and that led me to looking at, again, old scientific illustrations and some of these really fantastic, works by early naturalists. Those to me were really, really inspiring. And so, of course, I was naturally drawn to figuring out, well, where else can I see this kind of material, and how else can I be this up close with nature? And it's one thing to talk about like understanding different grasses, but if I want to paint a grizzly bear skull or a grizzly bear in my painting and I need to study the anatomy of the skull, I can't really go out and observe that in nature without putting myself at risk. So where else can I go learn about these things? And that's when I found myself in a natural history collection, and it blew my mind.
It sounds like you've always been curious. I wonder the asking of the questions. I know we've moved away from what you were like when you were younger, but just quickly, were you always asking questions when you were younger? Because it sounds like now your sort of curiosity is your profession.
Yes, it is. Yes, I've always had a lot of questions. And so, but as a kid, you ask too many questions and eventually you get the answer of that's just the way it is. I
Right.
don't know. You have an exhausted parent or an exhausted teacher just being like, I don't know. I don't have an answer. Stop asking me questions. And I think, a lot of that sort of attitude over time, I ended up internalizing and figured, well, it sounds like everybody's already asked the important questions. If we finally run out of answers, what else is there to ask then? But yeah, once I started doing this work of uniting art and science together, I realized there are a lot of other people who are asking these similar kinds of questions.
Yeah, and I'm so pleased that you that you did. So you are exposed to these natural history collections, and your eyes were open to this whole new world that you wanted to join. So how did you then take me through the transition between what you were doing as an artist to joining it, and what happened next?
Yeah, I love telling this story because I don't often get to get into the details like this. There's a couple things that happened all at once. One, the start of my senior year, I was in a printmaking class and I wanted to do a series of prints that depicted bird development. I thought, how weird is it that a bird lays an egg and sits on an egg and then the thing hatches and you've got this weird looking baby bird, and over a period of weeks you can watch this thing grow right in front of your eyes. But what are the other processes that are happening? And also, baby birds are ugly as hell. So, like, I wanted to make artwork about baby birds because they were just very, I don't know, unattractive in a way. So I wanted to, I don't know, challenge people's idea of what beauty is, I suppose. So I started doing that, but it became hard to find sources for this sort of thing. So I had this in my mind while I was going through the rest of the semester. And then I had my art advisor, a wonderful artist and woman by the name of Marianne Bongiorni. She invited us to one of her art openings that was in a gallery downtown Missoula. And I walked into this gallery, and what she had done was taken taxidermy mounts of deers and bears, sawed them in half, and then inserted the middle parts of other taxidermied bears and deers into them. So what you had were like these dachshund shaped bears and deers that were made out of real material. And the interesting thing to me was that Marianne Bongiorni identifies as a two-dimensional artist. She was our professor for our drawing class. And she came in and she was like, "This is drawing." And we're like, what are you even talking about? She's like, "I'm drawing in space. I'm drawing with line in space. It's all the same. Doesn't matter if you're drawing with graphite on paper or with taxidermy suspended from the ceiling. It's drawing." And I was like, wow, cool. Number one. Number two, you're telling me I can do taxidermy and that counts as my art credit? Where can I learn to be a taxidermist? Um, and so she was like, "You should just take some classes." And I was like, "Well, I don't even know where to take a taxidermy class." And it was around that same exact time that a friend of mine who was a volunteer in the zoological collection I'd never heard about posted a picture onto her Facebook page of a couple severed wolf skulls and heads that had been donated by Montana Fish and Wildlife. And it was her job to prep these for the zoological collection. But I didn't know that at the time. All I saw was that I was scrolling through Facebook, and all of a sudden, my middle of my feed was interrupted with desiccated wolf heads. And to me, the visual of that was arresting. I was like, "Oh my God, this is repulsive. This is so graphic. She's so candidly just posting this super graphic picture online. Is she not concerned what people are going to say about her, what they're going to think?" And, so I had all these ideas, and plus I was interested. How did she get to do this? Where do you get wolf heads? Why is she doing this? She's putting them in a colony of what? Flesh-eating beetles? I was like, what is this world that exists that is here at the same time I am here, but I don't know anything about it? So I was intrigued, and I begged her to take me into the collection, and she did. And I'll never forget the moment where she punched in the key code and opened the door to the zoological museum, because I was hit with a smell I'd never experienced, right? And the smell if you've worked in museums. It's a smell of naphthalene and mothballs, but also like a faint scent of decay. There's something, I don't know, there's some other odor. There's like history hanging in the air. And just being hit with that sensory experience, and then walking into a collection that was, you couldn't hardly turn around in the hallway because the cabinets were so close together and there were specimens covering every single square inch of the space. There's an entire flock of birds that were suspended from the ceiling, and there was just floor to ceiling boxes with skulls, and just there was 200 grizzly bear skulls right in front of me. And all of this kind of hit me at once. I had so many questions. Where do you get 200 grizzly bear skulls? Why do you have something from the 1890s in this collection? Who does taxidermy anymore? Like, don't we have photographs? And all of these things were just questions that couldn't be answered in a 20-minute tour. And so I just kept coming back. I was like, I'm going to come here until all of my questions are answered. And 10 years later, I'm still working in science and natural history. So clearly there are more questions to ask.
Absolutely. And you record that story with so much enthusiasm. I loved your description of history hanging in the air. I can completely relate. So, Emily, from that point onwards, you're going back there. How did it become your professional livelihood? You were still a student at this point. Can you just tell me how this kind of manifested into essentially leading up to the next 10 years?
Yeah, well, after that day, the part of that experience too wasn't just the tour of the collection, but my friend Emily, who was with me, with the wolf head lady, she took me to the prep lab, and that was the first time I ever prepped a specimen. And I'll never forget it. I had this surgically sharpened scalpel in my hand and a Western jumping mouse, and I was supposed to take the skin off this thing. And I had never held a scalpel, you know? And so you don't really know the power of it in a way. Like, it doesn't take a hard touch to cut through the skin of a small mammal. It is very light touch. And so that to me, I just stabbed it right in from the beginning. And I'm like, oh, clearly I have a lot to learn about this process. And so she walked me through it. She's like, no, no, like light touch. Okay, here's how you remove the fascia, separate the fascia. Here's how you invert the skin. And, just the details of taking that tiny scalpel around the inside of the eyelids and separating the cartilage of the nose, all these like tiny minute things that you never think about. When you see a mouse running across your floor, or you see something, a photograph in front of you, you don't have that tactile hands-on experience. And so one, I had that experience, and I didn't have any context for it. So when I went home that day, I didn't tell anybody about it, because all I wanted to do was dissect everything I saw. Every dog I saw walking down the road, I was like, what does the inside of your face look like? I need to know. And legitimately, I've always struggled with mental health issues, and I thought that was it. I said, I'm a serial killer. Like, there's no other explanation. I'm psychotic,
Mm.
I'm delusional, I'm gonna hurt somebody. I better not tell anybody how much I enjoyed this at all. And I didn't. I kept it hidden for a while, and I went to Marianne Bongiorni, and I asked her if I could spend my last semester creating a body of artwork inspired by the collection, because I wanted some kind of excuse to go back. That wasn't me just admitting that all I wanted to do was take animals apart and see what they looked like on the inside, because I didn't know what it meant. I thought there was something wrong with me, and she agreed to it. And so I started going back to the
Mm.
collection, and was doing scientific illustration for, I don't know, a hot minute. And eventually I just gave it up and was doing specimen preparation the whole time. And so then I graduated, but I never wanted to leave. And I spent different ways trying to justify my existence there, because I didn't know how else to try and to explain people what an artist was doing in a science museum. I didn't have the words for it. And I felt like a fraud. I felt like I had snuck my way into this collection undetected, and I needed to keep my head down if I hoped to stay in there. So I shared art stuff with my art friends. I brought them into the museum. We made a collaborative art show that was on our campus gallery and the student gallery for a while. It was just all artwork inspired by specimens in the collection. And I couldn't keep it under wraps after a while. I was working in the campus convenience store, and I had a space underneath my cash register. So I became known as kind of the skull lady. And sometimes people would come up to my cash register and they'd be like, what do you have underneath your cash register? And I'd have a student, like a specimen from the teaching collection with me. So, and I would change it like every other week. So some days I'd be like, today it's a beaver. And I would like just bust out a beaver skull, and show the customer for 30 seconds and be like, this is from the zoological collection. You can learn more on campus, like at this place. So I did that a lot. And eventually I just was getting a lot of attention as being kind of the weird museum lady. And it evolved from there. So I was doing all of this for fun, again. And I knew I needed a different kind of outlet for my expression, because I was posting a lot of the specimen prep stuff on my personal Facebook, and it was kind of disturbing my friends and family. they weren't expecting to see severed wolf heads on their timeline. So I started a blog. I had a Tumblr back in 2011. I started it, and it was umzoology.tumblr.com. And I just wanted to tell people what I was doing as a volunteer in this collection, because I had graduated at that point, and I was kind of doing the volunteer museum thing in the way that I thought I was going to be doing art on the side. So I would work at my prep job from like 6 to 10 a.m. And then from 10 a.m. to like 6 p.m., I would be in the collection, and I was the teaching assistant for a vertebrate osteology class. And I was doing a lot of tours and collaborative programs with like the Montana Natural History Center, just trying to get more outreach, more people involved in the museum, because it wasn't well funded and it wasn't well supported by the university at the time. It was, it historically and scientifically really important collection of northern Rocky Mountain wildlife, but over the years had kind of fallen into not disrepair. It was still being cared for, but I didn't see a lot of people using it in the way that I thought it could potentially be used. I thought it had a lot more potential than was being realized. And so I was trying to demonstrate the various potential things for the collection. So I was doing all of this without an end goal in sight. I was still trying to justify my existence in the museum and figuring out how I could continue to be involved in science museums as somebody with no science background whatsoever. And that's when I learned about museum studies. I didn't know museum studies was a thing. And I thought about pursuing a master's degree in museum studies, but I didn't want to leave Montana. For one thing, I couldn't afford it. Like, there was no way I could move across the country and start a master's program. But I found that the Johns Hopkins University offered a remote master's program. And so I could try like a couple of classes and just see, if it was something that I would be interested in doing. And if I did it from Montana, then I could focus my class assignments on projects in the museum. So to me, it was like a win-win situation. And so I started my master's program when I was still volunteering in the museum. And that was the same time that I ended up starting the YouTube show, The Brain Scoop. So I eventually dropped out of my master's program is the answer to that question. But the Brain Scoop was really how I ended up being able to turn this passion into a career.
You brought me perfectly and segued beautifully to my next question. And I was just going to say that it sounds so wonderful to have had a mentor like that that you talked about, a zoology collection, to really nurture that curiosity and that interest. I know you said that you felt like a little bit of keeping it under wraps, and it's lovely to hear that she saw that in you. She saw that potential and she was able to kind of foster that. But talk to me about the Brain Scoop. So what was your intention behind the channel, and how did you feel from being behind the scenes with this kind of curiosity over spilling to the moving on camera?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had so many insecurities about it at the beginning. I don't think I would have ever thought that I could do a video hosting if it hadn't been for Hank Green. So a lot of people know Hank as, part of the Vlog Brothers on YouTube. He and his brother John have been really active on the platform since 2008. And Hank and John have, together over the last decade or more, helped develop some of the most popular educational channels on YouTube. And I didn't really know that at the time. I was aware of Hank, but I certainly didn't know that he lived in Missoula, Montana, where I was living. And at some point, my blog must have come across his radar, or he otherwise heard about the Zoological Museum, because he reached out to us to ask if he could come and film a video there for Crash Course, which was his new series on biology. Again, this was back in 2012, so I can't believe it was almost 10 years ago. But I kind of freaked out because I was like, here's our shot. Like, here's my chance. I can tell the world about this museum, and maybe I'll find other people who are interested in it. Or maybe they're going to tell me that I really am a lunatic, and then I'll just know. Then I will have the confirmation I need, and I will seek treatment for my mental illness. 100%, that is absolutely what I thought what was going to happen. So he came to see us at the museum, and through that, partnership, that initial video that we collaborated on, he saw a lot of promise in me, and he eventually he came back and I gave him a tour of the collection without knowing that I was going to be on camera. He told me that after he showed up. He's like, "Oh yeah, we're going to just record you giving this tour." And I had no idea. I didn't prepare for it. Um, so I just gave him the tour that I always give and showed off the cool animals that I think are cool and shared what I had learned about them by studying their anatomy or looking up more information about them on Wikipedia or whatever I could find. And so that video ended up going up on Vlogbrothers on like a Friday. And by Monday, it had almost, I don't know, a couple 100,000 views. And Hank emailed me. He's like, "I think you should just do this. I think you should have your own YouTube channel." And I'm like, "I don't know how to do it." He's like, "Well, good thing I do." So he, it was really again, it was like his support, his encouragement. I thought, man, if this guy who has millions of fans all around the world, he's a leader in this space. If he believes in me, then the least I can do is believe in myself a little bit. And so we launched the Brain Scoop. But kind of also, I mean, one of the things I told him from the beginning is I have to be out in front of what I really do here. I didn't want people to think that all I did all day was doodle specimens and give tours, because most of what I wanted to do was specimen preparation. And I still didn't know if that was an okay thing to like. So when we started the show, I said, I want to be as transparent as possible about this, because if people are going to take issue with it, I would rather they take issue with it at the beginning, again, so I can either know or not know what is acceptable. Like, I had no idea if I was going to post videos and I'd have museum people writing me, telling me, "What business do you think you have talking about museum collections?" I was really concerned about it because I was really insecure. Um, and so from the beginning, right at the start of January 2013, when we launched the channel, about a week into filming videos, I got a call from Montana Fish and Wildlife that they had a wolf, a juvenile male wolf, that they had a radio collar on. So they'd been tracking him, and it got hit by a car. And so they wanted to know if I would come pick it up and prep it for the collection. And of course, that was what I was doing as a volunteer. So I was like, heck yeah, give me a wolf. That would be awesome. But I asked her if we could film it for a YouTube show. And she said, I guess so. And so that was the first like big series we posted on Brain Scoop, was the act of going out, picking up this wolf from Fish and Wildlife, bringing it back to the collection, skinning it, dissecting it, and eventually, preparing it for its eternal use in a zoological repository. And I thought I would post this series and people would, I don't know, I was expecting hate mail. I was expecting death threats. I was expecting, again, museum people writing to me and telling me, "What do you think you're doing?" And none of that happened. None of it happened. The complete opposite thing happened. These videos were, I was written up on NPR. There was articles about me in the Times. I was getting emails and messages from other museum people being like, "Wow, I can't believe you did it. We've been trying to, share more about specimen preparation for years." And the response has always been, "The public can't handle it. The public's not interested. This is too gross for most people. Most people won't understand. We're going to get PETA coming after us. The animal rights activists are going to burn our collection down." And I really didn't see or experience a lot of that. And that surprised me. And what surprised me even more was how genuinely other people expressed their curiosity. And that, to me, the seeing the response to our skinning the wolf video is what gave me the confidence to go into this 110%, because I realized for the first time, like, I am mentally unwell, but this fascination is not a part of it. Like, this fascination is my genuine curiosity. This is human curiosity. This is innate human seeking connection, seeking answers, asking about things that help strengthen our relationship with the natural world. This is natural. This is a natural curiosity. This is normal. Normalize this. And so I was like, that was my mission. I was like, all right, we're going to normalize natural history, museum science. I don't care how gross it is. I don't care how weird it is. Like, we're going to go into this and try and just encourage other people to embrace their own curiosity, even if they might be self-conscious or insecure. Like, that's the beauty of asking questions.
It's an amazing series of events. And I imagine you sort of being the figurehead for asking these questions allowed people, it sort of gave people permission to indulge in their own curiosities that perhaps they hadn't been given a platform to do that. And your YouTube channel sort of gave them that opportunity to say, oh, there's someone like me. Maybe they were also
Yeah.
internalizing it like you had done growing up. And then this was kind of like opening the floodgates, like, welcome to this kind of crew of people.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're your people, like fellow nerds, unite, come together. We are here to support one another in our mutual appreciation of the weirdness of the world. Like, let's do this. All right. But I do think, there's the beauty of the internet is that it allows for people to find community where they otherwise would have not have found community. So one of the places I first found community was in vulture culture on Tumblr. I didn't know what vulture culture was, but when I started posting pictures of like, hey, I picked up this bighorn sheep on the side of the road. Anybody else interested in this? A lot of people would be like, oh yeah, I have a permit to salvage roadkill, or I have, I work with a pet store and I'm a taxidermist. And so like that was kind of my first community of people. But we were all, it still felt like we were all a little bit on the fringes of society. Like we were still kind of doing this on the DL, whether or not, I mean, people still had like legal permission to do it. It seemed like something that had a really small audience. And so posting this to YouTube, I think the Wolf series and starting the Brain Scoop just revealed how big this community is really, and how deep this level of curiosity about the natural world, how deeply that permeates our societies, and just that we need an outlet for it. You need language to articulate what it is you're interested in, whether it's like taxidermy or the history of natural history or scientific illustration in particular. Like it's just shared language to find commonalities between people.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely speaking my language. And Emily, talking whilst we're still on the conversation about YouTube, I would love to talk to you about perhaps something that kind of errs towards maybe more of a darker side. But first, before we do that, I was going to say that obviously propelled you to become something of a celebrity, as I've seen quoted in multiple articles. I've seen the term feminist science icon used to describe you in countless of these articles. How do you feel about that? And what has been the hardest thing about filling that role specifically?
I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, sometimes I see things like that and I'm like, this person just wanted clicks for their article. Like, I don't know that I really
Right.
identify as being an icon. I guess there are things that I have done that other people have not. Like, I hosted and wrote this series and filmed the series for PBS, and I'm one of very few women to lead their own science program on PBS. So yes, in a way, like I still am unique in some of the work that I do. But I don't know. It's a kind of a hard question to
Mhm.
answer, mostly because people ask like they ask questions like that, and the first thing that comes to my mind is like I still scoop my cat's litter every morning. Like I still put my
Yeah.
garbage out by myself every week. I still do like there's almost nothing about my life that seems glamorous in many ways. I work by myself, my home office these
Yeah.
days, but so is everybody during the
Yeah.
pandemic. So I think it's hard for me to feel like I'm truly special, and also because I know that there are so many other people who've been doing this work. They don't get the recognition they deserve, and they don't get those articles or those headlines written about them, even though they
Mm.
deserve them as much, if not more, than I do. So I just try to be really cognizant of that and try to not let that get to my head.
Well, since you just said that there are lots of people who are doing similar work and not getting the recognition for it, do you feel that that's a pressure that you deal with? And how does it feel to have the responsibility of, quote unquote, carrying the torch?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think we're so critical of women in the media, and that's a pressure that hangs over my head. Also, when we kind of skipped over me joining the Field Museum, but that was the result of starting the Brain Scoop channel. And so I got this job offer to move the channel and myself physically to the Field Museum in Chicago uh, midway through 2013. And then I was given this amazing job title, Chief Curiosity Correspondent, and the keys to the collection, so to speak. And that put me so far ahead of where I felt I really was in terms of being able to lead anything. I think had just turned 23. I was a baby. Like I was like a tiny
Mm.
adult human who was just starting to learn about things like, I don't know, withholding
Yeah.
tax amounts. Like, I never made enough money to know how to be a grown up in a way. And then I moved to Chicago and I'm being called a feminist icon and an accidental
Yeah. Yeah.
scientist. And I just didn't feel like I'd earned any of that at that point. And still, I struggle with that too. I still feel like, um, oftentimes I've just been given credit that maybe I haven't earned, and a lot of that comes down to internalized imposter syndrome and that sort of thing too. But it can be really hard to navigate, whether or not you have a word for it. It is hard to navigate, and so yeah, I think I don't know. It's complicated for me.
It definitely sounds complicated. Um, Emily, we did sort of just touch on it very briefly about some of the pressures and perhaps some of the hardships about having that role. I would like to talk to you, if you're prepared to share it with me, a little bit about the trolling that I know that you experience. As somebody myself who personally experiences regular trolling, I could definitely empathize. Would you be prepared to talk about that a little bit and how you faced it and approached it?
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah. So that was one thing. I started working at the Field Museum and now had this huge charge, right? This huge sense of responsibility of representing one of the largest natural history museums that had existed over, 100 years at that point, employed 500 people. Like, the impact of this organization was outsized. Not outsized like in reality, but in my mind it was inconceivable for me to wrap my head around just how important this organization was, and how, just that sense of responsibility, knowing that museums are the most trusted institutions and organizations, period. Like, more so than media, more so than news, more so than what you see in a textbook or on TV. It is museums are treasured, um, places of authority, and this is something that has been fostered in culture. That we foster and support over decades and decades, and museums take that responsibility really seriously. So I needed to take that responsibility really seriously, and it was getting hard for me to focus on that responsibility, because I was getting so many comments that were detracting from what I was trying to do. So I poured
Mm.
my, everything I've got into making these videos that inspire curiosity and help people make connections with the natural world. And there were so few women in science media at the time. I really thought, like, I can't screw this up. I got to do this right. And I put all my heart into my work. And then the feedback I was getting was that I would be more successful if I dressed sexier, or I was too annoying, or somebody didn't like my voice, or they didn't like one sentence I had said out of a 10-minute video that I'd spent a month researching. And, these things were really, I was like, come on, guys, like, I need your help here. Like, I have a lot on my shoulders. There's a huge weight of the world, and all you want me to do is focus on my makeup? Like, come on. And so that was really, it's getting hard for me to deal with. So we ended up making a video about it, called "Where My Ladies At," where I had my producer at the time read some of these comments, in the video, like behind my back, but in front of the camera, to try and get the audience to sort of experience what that feels like. And the response to that video was really surprising, because I thought the response would be that people would tell me to stop whining, or, the equivalent of get back in the kitchen and just do your job and don't focus on this and don't feed the trolls. And really the response was huge. If I thought my wolf series got me a lot of attention, this video blew the lid off of everything. And I think it's because of that video I'm still talking about these issues 10 years later. But the conversation has kind of stopped there. We stopped by addressing the fact that, yeah, there are trolls on the internet, and yeah, women are, subjected to sexual harassment every day of their life, that they're online, and it's so much worse for people who aren't privileged like me. Like, I'm a privileged white lady from, like, a solid background. I have parents who can support me. I have so many other privileges that are afforded to who I am, and yet, here's this thing we're still talking about as though the worst thing that happens is that they're just comments on the internet. but it's not just comments on the internet. I was having people recognize me on the train. People would impersonate my friends and family to try and get my cell phone number when they would come to the museum. They would say like, "I'm Emily's uncle, but I don't have her number. Can you give me her cell phone number?" So then we had to like educate security about security concerns. I had to move because I didn't have an apartment building with a doorman, and so I was concerned about going home at night. And so that was the undercurrent. It wasn't just harassment online, it was harassment in person. And I didn't know how to navigate it, and I didn't know how to stand up for myself, because the reaction is, well, if you don't like it, just stop. Just stop posting to the internet. Just do a different job. And when in my mind, I was like, this is what we need. We need women supporting science initiatives. We need representation. Like, I need some help navigating this. And I channeled it into that video, and I was happy with the outcome, but the harassment just got worse. And yeah, I mean, it's the worst part of my job. I've had to go to court and get restraining orders. So like, there's a lot underneath all of that I don't talk about often because it is overwhelming for people to hear. But that's the reality of representing yourself in your work online. It's not just harassing messages, it's people manifesting that in very real ways. And unfortunately, blocking them online doesn't stop it.
Yeah. Oh, that's horrific, Emily. And I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. And I find it frustrating because as somebody who perhaps doesn't have it quite as bad as you, but has experienced, similar things, one thing that I find very frustrating is it actually undermines the hard work that you're doing that's actually important. It starts to become so consuming that what the whole objective of what you set out to do becomes completely tarred by, being undercut by these derogatory comments. And it sort of just takes the fun out of all the hard work that you have put into the project.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's one of the most frustrating parts of it, is I do spend so much time and energy having to navigate that I can't actually focus on what I wish I could be doing. And also just educating the people that I work with about like the emotional and mental toll it takes, because nobody else is experiencing it. So often I would get that kind of reaction from colleagues who would be surprised to hear that I was still dealing with it. They're like, "Well, I thought you made a video about it 7 years ago. Why do you mean you're still dealing with it?" As though acknowledging a problem that has existed for hundreds of years is in itself enough to make it go away.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to put too much on it because that makes me feel like I'm not recognizing all the other incredible work that you have done, the fact that you are still having to talk about it so many years later. But like I say, I do feel that that is definitely the dark side that needs to be addressed, because so that people, don't fall prey to it themselves. Do you think that there's a possibility that that is why there is so few STEM channels being led by women, or that women don't feel like they can continue to contribute in these spaces because of the fear of that, or the threat of that even?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because that is the part that people don't see. So what people do see is still like a hell of a lot of harassment for anybody who's posting anything about themselves online. So, yeah, God forbid you're a woman on the internet, or a person of color, or somebody from the LGBTQ community, or any other marginalized group of people. You just have to have like a constitution, an internal constitution that is 10 times what it should need to be in order to continue enduring online. You need a community. You need a support group. Like, really, like, if I didn't have my partner, if my family wasn't in my corner at all times, if I couldn't, you know, I have somebody who has connections to the police in Chicago. They can get in touch with any police department in the US. I've been in touch with the FBI. Like, I have those privileges where if I go to the authorities with concern about my life, they take it seriously. But what if I was a Black woman and I was concerned that someone was harassing me online? Like, we know that people from marginalized backgrounds they can't look to law enforcement as for help. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think when things begin to escalate for creators online, like you, it can be really hard to keep doing it. And so I do think it's something that prevents more people from becoming involved, just because it's such a mystifying and often, threatening and dangerous looking situation. So, and I don't, I share that because, and I'm glad that you asked me about it too. And I'm going into the extent of detail that I am about these because I don't think we address it enough. And it is a problem. And if there's anything that I can do to help other people feel more comfortable talking about what the issues are, the closer we can become to finding solutions to those problems. So that's why I talk about it.
Absolutely. And not feeling like we have to silence it because, society doesn't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Emily, I'd love to move on and we could talk about that all day, but like I say, I don't want to not put enough emphasis on the other amazing things that you've done by talking about it for too long. You walked for the March for Science in 2017 and the Global Climate Strike for 2019, and you regularly speak at STEM conferences, Women in Science, and science education seminars. Would you say that you're an activist? And do you ever worry about politicizing science, or do you think that politicizing science is essential in bringing about real change?
Yeah, I mean, I say I would be an activist because I'm actively doing a lot of this work. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, everything gets political because everything, at least in America, comes down to dollars, and capitalism is political. So that is the system in which we operate. And unfortunately, if goodwill was the only currency that mattered these days, then we wouldn't have to fight so much at the state and local and federal levels for protections um, for things like preserving natural environments and species protections. And so those conversations do end up being politicized at the expense of really getting into the weeds and getting at the root of the problem. So I think saying an issue like climate change has been politicized is that's okay. All right. So what though? I mean, it's still an issue. It impacts everybody everywhere. Like, so what if it's politicized? Like, we have to act. We have to do things about it. So let's work within the framework that we have that exists in order to do what we can, no matter who you are. So sometimes that means getting involved at the federal level, but it probably means more like getting involved in the local level. So for instance, in my community, there is a golf course that was sold a couple of years ago to a developer who now wants to turn it into a distribution center. And my current, like my community is fighting this at the local level because they don't want the town to rezone the area for manufacturing. If it remains zoned for green space, then the people who bought the land can't develop it. And so like this is just one example of like how you stand up for the environment in your own backyard, and you can have probably a bigger impact on that than you can trying to push federal laws through when you're not part of a lobbying group in Washington. So yeah, I don't know. Everything these days has been so politicized. I think it can be hard to even have conversations about it when everybody's been at home looking at how COVID has been politicized in the last year, and just how exhausting that has been to try and get anti-mask people to understand that it's so important that everybody wears a mask, and this isn't about your personal freedoms or rights. This is about global health problems. So it's really, I think, when we say that certain scientific issues have been politicized, it just detracts from what the real issue is. And again, like if you can't discuss what the issue is, you can't find solutions. So I'm a solution focused kind of person.
Yeah, no, yeah, you put that really succinctly. Emily, can you talk to me about your recent project, the Prehistoric Road Trip? You did mention it very briefly in passing earlier in the conversation. You did mention that you had written it and you were one of the first women to have a show on that channel, if I'm correct. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to life and the kind of objective behind it? What made you want to embark on that project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was approached by Chicago's PBS station, WTTW, a couple of years ago, and they were interested in knowing if I would ever want to make like an hour-long program, because most of our videos on YouTube were shorter episodes that were, up to 10 minutes in length. And I hadn't really thought about doing a longer special. Who does? Like, I don't know. I wasn't sitting around being like, I can't wait to make a TV show someday. I hope somebody asks me what I would want to do. But the one thing that resonated with me when I was talking to them about some things that they might be interested in was just my own background. I think places like the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming are not often considered in people's minds. They're the flyover states, quote unquote, and they become destinations for vacations and tourism. But I don't think people really understand just how much these areas contribute to our understanding of things like deep time and evolution and how the planet has changed in the last, I don't know, 4 billion years. Like you can find a lot of that geology. At least for the last 2 billion years in places like where I'm from. And, growing up in South Dakota, being from South Dakota, I just know that our science education it's probably better now, but it wasn't very good when I was growing up. And I certainly didn't think that there were any scientists whatsoever living in the state. And so, yeah, when I started working in natural history, I began to widen my understanding of what scientists are, who they are, and what they do. And I started to make the connections that the places where I was from do contribute a massive amount of knowledge and information about paleontology and geology. They're some of the most geologically rich and diverse places in the entire world. And how amazing to have that in my backyard. And I didn't even know it. And so, this was the impetus for Prehistoric Road Trip, which was a way to rediscover what I thought I knew about where I was from and to look at it in a whole new light and to bring people along with that journey to expose more folks, mostly in the United States, introduce them about some of the places they might not be aware of because, who goes to Western North Dakota on vacation? I don't know. Maybe some people do, but it's just is not like not not as highly visited as Yellowstone National Park. And so I wanted an opportunity to celebrate the places I was from and get other people to, I don't know, to appreciate those places too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's lovely that you're able to shine a light on it and give it the attention that it deserves. I've only seen some clips, but it does look very beautiful. What was it like being out in the field? And I know that you've gone out into the field to embark on other projects that have taken you not just out into the field, but out the continent. Can you tell me about some of the other trips that have been, particularly remarkable? And also, what the objective has been? Has it always been in the name of discovery or conservation?
Yeah, well, filming Prehistoric Road Trip was amazing. It took us like, I don't know, 8 months to plan the filming trip because we had 3 hours of television we had to film. We had 32 or so locations and it was a lot. We ended up driving like 6,000 miles total. It was an absurd amount of travel. So it was a lot to coordinate. But honestly, part of the reason I wanted to do the show and wanted to do it out there is because I just missed the landscape. Like I just wanted to be back at home. I wanted time to immerse myself in the places that felt familiar, that felt comforting. And after living in Chicago for years, and I've come to love my neighbors and find things that I enjoy here, but it just doesn't speak to my soul like the Northern Plains do. And so being out there for me was the most no matter the amount of work we were doing, and it was an absurd amount of work, it felt like a vacation in a lot of ways. And so I also used the opportunity of filming to take a bunch of reference photos for artwork, which was like, yes, like this is what I wanted. I want my sweeping landscapes. Um, so yeah, so it was a lot of fun being on the road, and in addition to like filming everything, I mean, I met so many incredible people. I subjected our film crew to, being outdoors and not providing any bathrooms. It was like such an adventure. We're like, we don't have access to fresh water and there's not a flush toilet in 30 miles. Like, let's do this. So there's that sense of adventure that I love and miss. And that was a lot of fun. I've had the opportunity to go on other filming trips, everywhere from like Kenya to Germany and Peru, and each trip has a different objective depending on who we're going with. But usually the root cause is just helping people understand and appreciate the natural world and wherever they may be. So like when we were in Germany, we filmed a video about this wetland area that is being preserved, not only like the footprint that it occupies, but also the sounds of the environment. They've been doing field recordings of this area for decades and decades, like taking actual field recordings of the bird songs, and they will record for weeks at a time. So you can have like, 7 days worth of recording or a month or 2 months, and over time you can analyze those sound recordings and see how the auditory environment is changing in a preserved wetland area. So, like, to me, I just there's always just a new opportunity to look at nature and science and research in a different way, and that's what keeps it exciting
Yeah,
for me.
that's really interesting. I've never heard of a project like that, so that's super interesting. You've obviously glazed over some of the incredible experience that you've had and the opportunities that you've had. It's probably impossible for you to say, but can you think of a standout moment in your career so far?
Oh gosh, a standout moment. I would say, yeah,
Yeah, I knew it would be a question.
speaking at the March for Science was huge. I think because, again, like when I think about where I'm from a town with 60,000 people. That is just where my brain hits a limit in terms of the number of people I can conceive of. Like, I can't wrap my mind around being in a football stadium that can sit 300,000 people or whatever. Like, that to me is inconceivable, because we didn't have stadiums like that growing up. We didn't have buildings like that where I'm from. Like, did you know there's like one escalator in the entire state of Wyoming?
What?
I'm not exact like the Yeah, when I was growing up, one time we drove 6 hours just to go to an Olive Garden on the other side of the state because we didn't have Olive Garden. Like, I so there are so many things that, I don't know, that are really, like, hard for me to reconcile in my brain, just, like, looking at people. And so when I started making YouTube videos, seeing that 10,000 people or 40,000 people watched it, I just can't wrap my mind around it. People say, like, "You have, 500,000 subscribers." I'm like, "I don't that number is meaningless to me," until I did the March for Science, and I was the keynote speaker, and I had to stand up in front of 40,000 people. There were 40,000 people there. I cannot
I can't.
You can't. I mean, I look at the pictures and you can't see the people ending. And like half of them couldn't hear my talk because they didn't have enough speakers going all the way back because there was more people than they thought. But yeah, I mean, to me, it was the most overwhelming experience of my life. I blacked it out. Like, I don't remember. I just remember approaching the podium and just being like, "Oh my God, there's a lot of people here." And that has made me rethink the numbers that I see associated with things I do online. Like 1,000 people, that's a lot of people. And
Yeah.
I think we forget that in the age of like constantly changing or constantly chasing audience growth.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I only have 10,000 followers on Instagram, but to be
Right.
really successful, I need 20,000. It's like, what does that even mean? 10,000 people watch what you do. That's amazing. Like, so, there's 300 million people in the United States. If 10,000 of them love what you do, like, that's an amazing community that you've built. Like, foster those people. So I don't, I just try to focus on the audience that you have there, and don't, I don't know. I think a lot of people just constantly are looking to grow their platform, and that they're only successful when they reach certain numbers. And I am anti that philosophy. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose it's also about what has currency in the real world. You might have, let's say you have 50,000 followers, but how many of those people are actually, invested in what you're doing and are genuine,
yeah,
genuine followers, if you like.
it's so weird. It's
Um,
so weird though.
it is very weird. I did see the photograph of you standing on the podium, and you're right, it did look like a festival or something. It was nuts how many people there were.
I know. If I didn't have those pictures, I'd have like no recollection of that speech.
Well, as we're talking about the March for Science, you do mention in your speech a little bit about the importance of showing up. Can you, or would you, suggest any ways that people can do more to show up for the natural world or to get involved?
Yeah, I think showing up takes a lot of different forms, and that's the beauty of it. You get to decide what it looks like to show up, but so long as you're asking the question, what am I doing to show up for this cause? Like, and sometimes you can't do a whole lot. Like, I'll be honest, sometimes I don't have the energy to think about like these
Yeah.
big overwhelming problems we're facing. Sometimes showing up just means like taking your kid for a walk. like that, taking time to look up a fact together, learn something new together. Showing up can be reading a book that you normally wouldn't read, but it feels like it's something that might teach you something new or offer a new perspective. Like, I don't know, it can take a lot of different forms. Showing up means being active in your local community, right? With whether with politics or just schools, churches, hobby groups. Like, I think there's a lot of different ways to express yourself and your involvement and your appreciation for the natural world. Especially like if you're an artist, that's easy to do. Make artwork about nature. There's an infinite number of possibilities there. In school, like the research, the assignments that you pick, the topics you pick for your assignments, what you choose to study in college, or so it can be like professional based. It can be what you do at home. It can be what you do in your free time. It can be a hobby. It doesn't. I think it just takes so many different forms for so many different people. Um, but the root of it is just to just show up, to check in with yourself. Like, could I be doing more? Am I doing as much as I think I can? Do I have capacity to take on more? And honestly, like showing up too means like promoting the work of other people if you can, like especially on social media. And I know you're really active on Instagram. So like showing up means engaging with people who are already working on these causes, to learn more about those causes, learn about the history of those causes, learn more about where those causes hope to be leading in the future, and like supporting the people who are a part of those causes. So the like boots on the ground folks who are at the heart of it. So like supporting those people, amplifying their voices and stories, investing in their community, sometimes investing in them, like actually investing in them, providing your support that way. So like there's just 5 billion different ways that you can show up for nature in your life.
Well, there's a lot that people can take away from that. You did mention something very quickly, and I know I'm taking up a lot of your precious time, so I promise it's only a few more questions. But you did just mention there, talking about art. And I know that in the previous answer, you talked about taking some references from your prehistoric road trip in Dakota. And I was just thinking, do you still make art? Do you still get any time to do your own art?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's been the silver lining of the pandemic for me, is like given me time to build my studio at home. So this is I've never had or never granted myself a lot of time to invest in my art. I continue to like internalize like the lack of importance that I grew up thinking that art occupied. So I'm like, well, no, I should be doing something more. I should be writing a post, or I should be working on another video. And I kind of put all that aside and was like, you know what I need? I need art. Like I need to paint. I need to sit upstairs and think about rocks without distraction or interruption. And so that was, and I've mentioned it a couple times, but struggling with mental health issues is like a never ending job that I have on the side of my other jobs. And so that became a bigger job for me during the pandemic and required more of my attention to address. So art was a huge outlet, and a way for me to just focus on caring for myself. Like art is a form of self care for me. So I started, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, I'm just going to make some paintings, and it's evolved to the point where I was toying with the idea of making a new YouTube series about art and science, and I just found out today that I might be getting some funding to do it. And so that is like, I am so excited. I haven't been this excited since I started the Brain Scoop, but like the idea of putting everything I've told you today and mashing it together as a celebration of the combination of art and science is like what I have my eyes set on for now. So yeah, I plan on making art a much bigger part of my life, just because I've missed it. And I think it has the potential to teach people so much. So I'm excited
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. I'm so excited for you. That sounds absolutely marvelous. And I'm so pleased to hear that you're able to take some comfort and therapy from your art. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that there is that side to things as well. Um, Emily, I promise I'm going to let you go in a second. You've just shared with me something super exciting in the pipeline, but I just have two more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The first one being, what is, if at all, your hope for the future of natural history, specifically in natural science? do you want to, I know museums are having a lot of streamlining with funding. What do you want to happen? What do you want to see? How does it look for you?
Oh, that's a great question too. So one thing I always used to try and encourage and promote, when I was working at the Field Museum in Chicago, under this fantastic title of Chief Curiosity Correspondent, is I wanted other museums to hire people like me. Like I wanted every museum in the country, in the world, to have someone whose job it was to invite people into the places that normally the public can't go. And the more diverse perspectives you have to be that person, the better. Like, I just think we have, museums especially are and always have been dealing with the legacy they inherit. Like it's collections built by colonialism, founded with ideals of racism, and you have to acknowledge that part of your history in order to see progress. And unfortunately, I just think it's taking a lot of time, and museums can be reluctant to address and acknowledge that part of their history. And so I see so much of, there's still a lot of control over who we allow in these collections and what we allow them to say. And I would like to see that change. And fortunately, I do. I see with the, explosion of social media, um, so many new opportunities for alternate perspectives to start to move the needle. When I first started making YouTube videos, there were very few women, certainly no people of color really, who were getting a lot of the same kind of attention that I was, um, as science correspondents. And now when you look at across the landscape of people who are making waves in social media, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok or Twitter or Instagram, like I could not name all of the interesting people that I follow now who are serving similar roles for their institutions or their universities, their labs. You know, it's been a really amazing to see. And so I think any organization that is willing to embrace these young creative voices, that is willing to allow them to challenge these long held ideas that have their roots in colonialism and racism, especially when we're talking about natural history, because that is the history that we've inherited. I see that as real progress. So it comes down to a combination of amplifying voices of people in these spaces who haven't had their voices amplified, and organizations being secure enough in their own image to embrace and acknowledge the criticisms that come up against these organizations. So to me, that's like a beautiful future that we can work towards together.
Yeah, we've still got a long way to go, but it's definitely going to get better. And I'm excited to see what it's going to be like in the future. Emily, my last question to you. What does your personal future look like? Is there anything that you really want to achieve? Any huge personal goals that you would like to, that you are yet to?
Oh gosh, I questions like this are always like, they're so hard for me to answer because I feel like I already won the lottery. It's like asking a lottery winner like the next time they're going to win a lottery. You're like, I already won once. Like how much better can it get for me? Like I can't believe I had the opportunity to have the job I did at that museum. Like I can't believe I had the chance to work on the Brain Scoop for 8 years. I can't believe I had a PBS series. Like I am satisfied for life. If I could continue having a job that allows me to pursue any of these interests at all, like I'm happy as a clam already. But yeah, I think what I mentioned before is like, if I could continue pursuing something, it would be, I just really wish that more people saw and understood and appreciated the value of art. I still think art is just, even when I was trying to sell this art series, a lot of the feedback I was getting is, well, can you make it more about science? Like we know we like the art part of it. Yeah, that's nice. But like, how are you going to use this to teach science? And it's like, well, why can't I just use this to teach about art? Like art itself is valid. Like art is 100% a valid enterprise on its own. Like, why can't we just focus on that? But it's, so I'm happy to bring those two things together, but also like I can see championing art being a lot more of what I do in the future. And I'm fine with that. I love art. I'm an artist at heart.
Oh, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. And that series is just going to be amazing. Thank you so much for giving up your time to speak to me today, Emily. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So there you have it, my conversation with Emily. Thank you so much to Emily for speaking so generously with me today. It's no wonder that Emily is such a successful science communicator. She gave us so much to take away in our conversation, and I hope you're feeling inspired in ways that you can show up for the natural world. If you're interested in Emily's work and some of the things that she mentioned, have a look at her Instagram. Her handle is Graslie. That's Egraslie. Or you can find her at her website, that's emilygraslie.com. Don't forget that for every episode, there are always links and further reading in the show notes. You can find me on Instagram at Elle Kaye Taxidermy. The podcast is at Specimens Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, so I really hope to connect with you there. Looking forward to bringing you the next episode, so speak with you then. Take care.